Sailors, people working at sea, what's the most creepy or most amazing sight you witnessed? The northern lights in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. We were anchored in a remote cove, so the CO agreed to turn off all the exterior lights. Just a crazy thing to see. Oftentimes in the Navy I'd stand on the fantail and watch the ocean. Once we had hundreds, probably around 400 dolphins riding the carrier's wake. They followed us for 3 days, in the middle of the Pacific. It's so dark and there's so little light pollution. You can see reds, browns and faint blues of gas clouds in the starscape. Another time I was watching the water at night. They say it draws you in, and it really does. You look at this pitch black void, with only the wake or turbulence of the water catching light, and intrusive thoughts of jumping in just naturally occur. It's mesmerizing, especially if you're alone. At night during one of these events I saw blue glowing water, what I now know as bioluminescent algae, and inside this rather massive patch of blue glowing water was squid, that appeared to be maybe 15-20 foot long. You could catch their outline by the light from the water. I stared at what was multiple squid passing by 4 minutes, what seemed like an eternity, and then the light started going away in the spot I was staring. There was still a lot of glowing water. We weren't headed out of it, but this patch gets darker and darker and darker until pitch black. A solid 15 seconds of intense curiosity. Suddenly a lot of turbulence and a whale surfaces. It had snatched up all the squid. The whale cocked to one side and looked at the ship, and our eyes met. I want to think it studied the ship for a moment until just sinking back down until the glow of the water masked it completely. This is better for Navy recruitment than Top Gun. Awesome. I'm not a seafarer, but I was camping on an island in British Columbia beside a cliff that was about a 15-foot drop into the ocean. Late at night I decided to jump in. The water exploded into light. The bioluminescence was triggered by motion, so the movement of my arms and legs as I swam made green trails in the blackness. I called to the other people and we had the trippiest swim ever. Everything, but to add for me, was the flying fish. I was just sitting there one day near Barbados, watching the water, and all of a sudden I looked over and there were these birds jumping out of the ocean. Took me a few minutes to actually understand that they were fish jumping out and not birds jumping in. Those things had some range on their glides. Later the next day when we went to Barbados, I found out the flying fish was on their currency and a popular dish. Tasted kinda fishy. Giant spears plunging in and out of the sea. In the Gulf of Alaska, I have seen some crap, but one of the most terror-inspiring things I've seen are what can happen with some of the loose logs from the logging trade. Sometimes when a big log gets loose from a raft, it becomes partially waterlogged and floats small end up. So you have this 4-foot diameter telephone pole in the sea, sticking up 40 feet into the air. No biggie, shows up on radar, and easy to spot. Now, give that pole 20 years of floating around or so, it rots in such a way that it becomes sharpened to a perfect point by wind and waves, and looks quite menacing. Now, put it in a gale with 25-foot waves, 50 feet trough to peak, and it becomes a towering spike of death that shoots up from the sea every 15 to 20 minutes, out of nowhere, 60 feet into the air, only to plunge down into the dark depths waiting to skewer some unsuspecting boat in a few minutes when it thrusts out of the ocean again. It is a genuinely terrifying sight. Rare, but not so rare that I haven't seen two in one season. It's like the spiked dick of Neptune looking for an opportunity to duck your crap up in a particularly terrifying way. I used to take British Columbia ferries, Queen of the North, from Prince Rupert on the northwest coast of British Columbia, to Port Hardy on the northeast coast of Vancouver Island, quite regularly in the mid-late 90s. She was a fair-sized vessel at about 400 feet and almost 9,000 tons, a beautiful 18 hours down the inside passage along British Columbia's north coast, on one winter trip, with the ship almost empty, as the tourists had all gone south for winter. We got into a pretty nasty storm, about 6 hours out of Prince Rupert. It got started. 2 hours after that we were buried in it. Winds up around 60-70 km and seas well over 25 feet. She was tossing and pitching like I'd never seen a ferry do before. Car decks were off limits, and upper decks were closed to travelers as both were just stupid dangerous. When ocean waves started smacking the lounge windows after cresting off the ferry's bow, they shut down the bar, but I will never forget the sound of all vibration caused by the ship's hull slamming into the occasional roadlog, like Thor's hammer, and then that vibration you get up and down your arm when you hit your funny bone, but this time through your whole body as the steel hull reverberates all that energy, be they old half-submerged remnants of broken log booms or fresh floaters from the coastal mills. They were ducking terrifying. Fresh out of college I got a job in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or so they said, as an architect designing whatever. Ended up doing oil rigs, and one beautiful morning there were sharks going under the main platform like always, but there were 2 dead sharks. Next morning 3 new dead, then 4 the next day, then a steady 4 or 5 a day for a week or 2. They would float up under the see-through deck that looked much like a metal calendar. Crew would have to punch them down so the current could catch them with a large pole. What made it really weird was they looked like they had heart attacks or died in their sleep. No marks or bites or anything. The guys on the rig had all kinds of theories. Then one morning while in a room that was completely submerged and had a beautiful view as we sat in a meeting, everyone got to see the reason the sharks were dying, like viewing it on a movie screen. This octopus had made itself a home between the base and the deck. A shark was swimming by in a cruising fashion and we see these tentacles grab it right in front of the glass and snap it like a glow stick. The marine biologist smiled and said octopus is literally doing that to entertain themselves, like because he can. The marine biologist lowered a dive camera and this octopus was huge. The crew would joke about it thereafter. People would smoke on the deck at night and people would say don't let the octopus in. Seeing those tentacles was just insane for their length, and to think about how a shark is mostly muscle and the octopus would just snap them was kinda scary. Was on watch and a lookout reported a ship on fire on the horizon. Looked through my binocs and saw what they were looking at. Looked like a plume of flame really far away, just over the line of the horizon. Went and consulted the astro books and discovered that it was actually moonrise. The tip of the crescent was coming up over the astronomical horizon, and was bright red-orange. Still very cool. I've also seen the Flying Dutchman illusion. Dolphins swimming through bioluminescent waters that looked like glowing torpedoes. Meteor hits near the ship. Lightning hitting the mast. Water spouts in the Caribbean. And the green flash at sunset. Many more things as well. Being at sea is just plain trippy. What's the Flying Dutchman illusion? An optical illusion that makes ships look like they are hovering above the water from far away. Not sure exactly how it works. Some ghost ship myths have been attributed to it. You know the feeling of being in a full stadium? 10,000s of people all within sight of each other, all together? Multiply that by 100 and maybe that would be like the sea of sea mammals I was in the middle of, presumably on a bunch of food below, squid or something. There were half a dozen species of dolphin and half a dozen species of whales all together going completely crazy, busting the surface white. Hundreds of thousands, I'm guessing. Going into the forecastle of the small 42-foot lobster boat was like entering a different reality. Through the hull you could hear. They were all talking to one another and I could say you could hear them, but it was something else entirely. The bones in my skull and the rest of my body were vibrating at every frequency, heard and sub and supersonic alike in alien rhythms and repeating patterns. A once-in-a-lifetime sensation. Lasted about half an hour. Highly recommended. In the USCG, was in the Eastern Pacific in February 2017. The bioluminescence at night was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Sailing the Caribbean you get the glittering speckles in your wake. But in this water the stern wake glowed very bright. Almost made it pointless to be running darkened ship. The bioluminescence was so much so that even fish in the water activated it. I remember a ghostly, glowing cloud silently moving toward us where we were taking it all in on the fantail. Then just as silently it moved away, we could see larger glowing clouds, likely a school of fish, then a glowing streak. Maybe tuna or something come flying into the glowing mass and the school would explode like fireworks underwater. Saw this occur a few times. It was amazing. Another time we were in the Caribbean, middle of the night at flight quarters. I was on the fire party and we were staged on the forecastle. We were kind of bored waiting for the helicopter come back. All of a sudden this massive meteor hurtles by overhead, completely turning night into day for a second. We were all in disbelief. The people wearing night vision goggles were a little ticked though. I used to work on an Atlantic salmon farm a few miles out to sea. Best job I ever had. Creepy. We were round at the second site, other side of the island to the main site, and this one was being left fallow for a couple years, so just required some maintenance every now and then, was used for storage. Me and my brother were there late afternoon to check some ropes or moorings or something. I can't remember, when all of a sudden there was this really strong electrical copper smell and the place went silent. It was flat calm, relatively clear skies, so it wasn't a thunderstorm coming in. For some reason this smell really freaked us both out, and we both felt like we were being watched by something, and there was a kind of strange feeling atmosphere to the place where it just seemed off. After a couple minutes it went away and the atmosphere returned to normal. We were pretty glad to get back to the main site but never experienced anything like that again. Really weird. Awesome. This one is hard to describe, but sometimes we would have to pull super long 18-20 hour shifts at harvest time. This involved starting sometimes at 2 AM and working until late in the evening. There wasn't actually loads of work the whole time. To do, we just needed to be present for a lot of it and lift a cage net once an hour or so. So we mostly just stood around drinking coffee and talking bollocks. Anyway, I digress. We were starting out one of these mornings in the speedboat heading out to the site. On a really crisp winter night, not a breath of wind, super cloudless sky and a hint of aurora above us. Speeding along into the night with my buddies in this beautiful scenery. Nice fancy survival suits on to keep warm. I remember looking up and seeing a huge sky full of stars, and a shooting star burning across the sky out towards the horizon. As I say, I can't really bring it to words, but I've never really felt more alive or happy in my work than that night. I was engineer and first mate on a converted LCM-8. In the fish trade, we operated in the Gulf of Alaska, Prince William Sound, and Bristol Bay fisheries as a tender, taking salmon and herring from smaller boats and villages in for processing on land. We had a regular spool windlass on the back, and for some reason, the company thought this made us equipped to tow a 220-foot barge from Witter, up through the Aleutian Islands at False Pass, and around to Bristol Bay and back each year. The Gulf of Alaska can be a cruel place sometimes, and at 4 knots max speed towing the barge, we got caught in a doozy. We tried sheltering behind an island. Can't remember. We were working our way up the Aleutian Peninsula, but even so we're unable to hold against the wind and got pulled out. The little windlass on the back deck was getting pulled off and ripping a hole in the engine room in the process. Eventually, in 25-foot seas, we let go the barge and just tracked it and followed it on radar, figuring we'd recover it when things calmed down in a few days. In the horrific days that followed, during which I must have vomited twice my body weight lol, we nearly got rolled once and took on about 10,000 gallons of water in one of our compartments. So, good times. On the last really bad night, I was on watch in the wheelhouse while the captain slept, about 3 AM, and we were rolling 33-37 degrees, losing 2 knots against the gale by the Loran. Yes, it was a while ago lol, with the barge popping in and out on radar about 4 miles an hour. Suddenly, the whole ship reverberated and shook with a thunderous boom, and I was sure we were done. We'd obviously hit something hard. I woke the captain in the deckhand, our entire crew lol. 15 minutes later. Still no sign of flooding in any compartments or other alarms, but I noticed the Loran lost signal, and I wasn't having any luck on the SSB trying to call in for a possible rescue. Yeah, right lol. The deck lights wouldn't come on, and we had a couple of popped breakers in the nav lights. After a while, it became obvious we weren't sinking, so we went about our watches just keeping an eye on things. At first light, I roped off and went on deck to see WTF, and then I saw what had happened. The World War II surplus LCM-80, Vietnam era LCM-8, sorry, I misremembered that, had a deckhouse at bulwark level, and a pilot house and stateroom built above that, so the roof of the pilot house was a good 25 feet above the water. Mounted to the steel of the pilot house was a 4-inch steel pipe that went up a few feet to a 3-inch steel crossmember, forming a large T on which our radio and navigation antennas, as well as our mast lights, were mounted. It was gone, the whole thing, bent over at 90 degrees and broken off as if by the hand of God himself. Also gone were the life rafts, which were also mounted on the roof structure. The massive 4-inch steel mast had been bent over and torn off. It wasn't like it was corroded and just broke. There was obviously massive force involved, and even the reinforced steel plate of the mast step on the cabin roof was distorted. It took us about a week, but eventually the seas abated and we were able to bring the barge in under tow to the shelter of the peninsula once again. We made the next 1,000 miles without much except flat seas and beautiful vistas. Such is the life of the mariner. When we eventually got into Dillingham, everyone was quite surprised as we had been declared lost at sea, and the Coast Guard had already given up the search days before. Both our life rafts had been found empty with their rapids deployed, and we were all assumed dead. I still have no idea what monstrous thing must have reached out of the sea and broken off that mast, but whatever it was inches away from taking out the wheelhouse where I was blindly staring out into the rain-tortured darkness on that night. Crap still haunts me. Edit. Some things I remembered wrong. LCM-8, not 75 feet long with the mods it had. Vietnam era, not World War II. Set up with a full-height engine room, 2x8-71 diesels, 1x3-71 genset, 2x4-71 genset, deckhouse at gunwale level with galley, head, shower, and double stateroom, above that a pilot house with captain's stateroom, decked over with tanks and reefer system for fish hauling. In the pitch black of night, in the middle of the vast emptiness of the sea, you see the stars filling the heavens, and more shooting stars than you would expect streaking to the earth with their fiery tails. As your eye draws down to the water, you find that somehow the ocean is darker and emptier than the sky. Your eyes strain for a glimpse of anything, but ultimately you only catch glimpses of strange and mysterious creatures lively swimming just beneath the surface, occasionally peeking above the surface or triggering flashes of bioluminescence that disappear as suddenly as they appear. I worked on a ferry that crossed a river, 3-minute trip, but a somewhat remote location. I worked alone, from 7 AM to 7 PM, all year. In the winter, the darkness was profound. Some mornings I'd show up in the complete darkness. You couldn't see lights from houses or streetlights, and it was only as the sky got lighter did you realize you were so fogged and at the end of the boat was even hazy. Some mornings in the spring, when the spiders were going nuts building their webs, and there would be webs all over the cabin door, the gates, the boat, that hadn't been there and I left the night before. From the cold morning dew or fog, there would be water droplets frozen all over them. When I would break a web to get past it, they would fall quickly to the ground and make a clinking sound from all the particles of ice. One time I saw needle ice, where blades of ice grow straight out of the ground. I pulled onto the gravel parking pad in the morning, and saw the needle ice in the dirt. Actually started the ferry late. It was fascinating to look at. I switched to a different boat, and my shift was 3 PM to 10 PM. I remember having a very vivid dream one night, about a deer with huge antlers standing on the end of the ferry in the dark, light by the street light. 3 nights later, I actually saw that deer. It wasn't on the boat, it was up and back further, but it was like in a movie, completely silent, just me and the deer, the whole world dropping away. When spring thaw happened, or huge storms came through, the river would get really high. The boat was attached to an underwater cable, so it wouldn't float away and couldn't go off course, but you could feel the water pushing so hard against it, the current would push the boat as well as the cable downstream that you'd feel the boat struggle to come in for the landing. You'd land, and immediately slide back off, or you'd look upstream, and a huge 100+ long tree, with branches and roots attached, would be floating at high speed right toward you. If you was in the middle of the river at the time, you'd have to brace against the controls and wait for the tree to hit either the boat or the cables. Hitting the ferry was easier. You could rock yourself free and move past it. When a tree, especially the root ball, hit the cable, you were screwed. It would tangle in the cable, and you couldn't move forward. If you went back to the shore you came from, the cable would be pulled so far, your landings would be messed up, and it would take 2 hours at least for a crew to come down, get in the dinghy with a chainsaw, and break the tree up. So you'd call it in, but then you'd steer the boat out to the tree, and ram it at full speed, back up, and ram it again, and again and again and again, the whole time hoping that whoever tied the cable down to the shore did a damn good job. You could feel the intense pressure on the cable as you backed up and rammed the tree again. Once, I had 2 cars on board, and a car waiting on the other side. It took 20 minutes of ramming the tree for enough branches and roots to break off and float away. Another time, a tree slid past the cable, but I didn't see it, and pushed it toward the landing under the apron of the boat. I couldn't land. There was a 12-diameter tree trunk between me and the landing, tangled in the weeds, the cable, the boat, all of it. I couldn't get close enough to let cars on or off. I was stuck. It took hours for a crew to come down and free me. Once, the power cut out while I was in the middle of the river. We were powered from an overhead line, with a long extension cord, only 8 inches thick, running between the boat and the power. When you died in the middle, the only option was to move the ferry with the rescue boat. This was a tiny aluminum boat with an outboard motor. It sat, attached to the ferry, hanging over the water. You'd lower it into the water, start it up, and the tiny outboard motor would eventually move the 40-ton boat toward shore, very, very slowly. It took over an hour, with passengers on board. was standing topside watch on a dark night when the sky suddenly turned bright. For about 3 seconds something was incoming that lit all the weather decks up like daylight. This sparked quite a reaction on the bridge and in operations. We were forward deployed during wartime, although not in a region where active fighting was expected. For a moment people scrambled, fearing we had been targeted for a surprise missile attack. Then the sky went dark again just as suddenly as it had began, leaving us safe and alone again. Yet there was still a whole bunch of commotion on comms as people jabbered stuff that amounted to Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. The only crew member who saw what had really happened was me. It's a meteor. It's a meteor. It's a meteor. Had to repeat the report several times before anyone paid attention. A meteor had come down almost directly above us, then broken up into 3 pieces as it burned up in the atmosphere. It was like a fireball. That put on quite a light show into the ocean on a moonless night at dark 30 in the middle of expletive nowhere. Astronomers call these bolides. It might even have been a superbolide, but it isn't on the list of recorded superbolides. We may have been the only ship that saw it. Based on the time of year and the location, it may have been one of the southern torrids, a meteor shower that's noted for producing fireballs. Not a whole lot of people ever witness a meteor that spectacular. By lucky coincidence I got a good view of this one. I sometimes work on a fishing boat during the summers for a bit of extra cash, and here's a few of my stories that you might be looking for. Keep in mind that some of them are dark. 1. The floater. Whilst fishing during the night, we heard something hit the boat. Now, of course, sometimes it's just some wildlife that couldn't see it in the dark, but we still went to look. I shone a flashlight into the water, only to see a person's body, face up, floating there. Needless to say, I freaked the duck out and nearly dropped the light. We reported it. Authorities came. We never found out what happened, but the theory we had was it was related to some sort of sinking, due to the life jacket they had on. 2. The fox. This one's not so scary, freaky, or dark. We were fishing close to an island, and saw something orange in the water. Now, my buddy thought it was just garbage, until it moved its head up. Turns out it was a fox. It came close to the boat, and I grabbed it and brought it aboard. Poor thing must have been treading water for ages, because it fell asleep in my arms. We released it on land after it had woken up. 3. Palatine sighting. Giving away where I live here, but in the area, there's a legend about a ghost ship known as the Palatine, otherwise known as the Countess Augusta or Princess Augusta. It's stated that the ship's burning mass can sometimes still be seen, and this is called the Palatine Light. We were out fishing. It was cold, we were all miserable. Then, a buddy of mine calls out that he sees another ship, and we turn. There, in the cold, we all swear that we see a ship aflame. We try to just chalk it up to the cold messing with our minds. Huge numbers of dolphins in a line, shoulder to shoulder, working forward, presumably driving a school of fish. It was like seeing a Roman legion marching to battle. I generally love seeing dolphins, but there was something quite daunting and slightly scary about seeing them work together in such a business-like way. Standing on a carrier's fantail at night, the bioluminescent algae was sometimes bright enough at night it provided normal level light if you were right at the lifelines. You'll never see the stars like we have. There are so many faint stars that just can't make it through the light pollution. It was a mesmerizing collage of twinkling lights. There was almost more starlight than black space. They were in such plethora. Once while smoking in an exterior smoking area on the starboard side, I exited the ship's hull to see we were cruising about 25 knots over glass smooth water. No waves, no ripples, but our wake. This is actually a bad omen, as the opposite of fair winds and following seas is no wind, which left ye old sail ships motionless. Later that day we had an emergency diesel generator fail and almost explode during routine testing. Once while on watch in the engine room, I heard the high-pitched echoes of what sounded like someone pinging us with sonar. A while later, I heard the same sound in a much lower octave. I'm almost certain it was a whale close enough to us that I could hear it through the hull, as the engine room interior is under the waterline. A carrier truly defines her own path through the sea. We sailed straight through a high-powered typhoon. The waves attempted in all their might to splash over the fantail. Hangar bay doors were closed for safety because you could see the horizon rocking up and down 30 degrees. Extra overboard watches were posted, and all I felt was the ocean rocking me to sleep in my rack. No matter how small, cramped, smelly, or loud my rack and berthing may have been, that was and shall always be the best night's sleep I ever had. It was always a good day when you saw seagulls, as your next port of call was close at hand. Creepiest would be underway on the 31st of October, Halloween day off maybe 15 miles off the coast of Florida near Miami. Look outside, so White House boat looks like it's just drifting. So we get closer on our fast response cutter, 154 feet, to make contact with them. Nothing. No one responded. Used radio, loud hailer and ship's whistle. So captain said let's launch our small boat and go investigate. During the small boat mission brief I reminded everyone that it's Halloween day and this looks just like a horror movie storyline. So the boat launches and the crew gets on board. The doors are closed, but lucky open so the crew can investigate. The boarding team slow conducts its safety sweep while looking any crew on board. So here is a houseboat floating on the ocean with no land in sight, abandoned. So the boarding team marked the vessel with spray paint and left it. Houseboat is probably in Europe if it didn't succumb to the relentless sea. Another time in the middle of the night between midnight and 3 a.m. we start tracking a target of interest. We clearly see someone and at least 2 others on a cabin cruiser. The vessel is unlit, which is a red flag, and steady speed, so we follow it and decide to launch the small boat for pursuit once they are close to U.S. territorial seas. We run our small boat with lights off as well and have night vision goggles to help us see them. I pull up with 15-20 feet of the vessel and flip the blow lights and spotlight on them. No one is on the boat. All we see is a boat, no one standing up behind the helm or on deck. So I creep up closer, then all of a sudden we see arm hanging over the gunwale. The boarding team starts yelling, "Show us your hands and stand up." No one moved, they were laying on top of each other, so we get the boarding team on board and start checking boat for safety. We transfer all of the 26 migrants off the 35-feet boat on the fast response cutter, 154 feet. This was in the late 70s. We were in the South Atlantic near Antarctica on an oceanographic research boat, middle of nowhere, and hadn't seen another ship in 2 weeks. A calm day with fog here and there, so we were sounding the foghorn as required. Not a pleasant experience on the bridge as your ears get blasted every 60 seconds. I was on the wheel when the mate said, "Whoa. Look at that." Out of a fog bank about 500 yards away, a 2-masted topsail schooner suddenly appeared sailing opposite our course, all sails up and no one on deck, and absolutely no image on radar. We tried hailing on the radio but no answer. She ghosted into another fog bank and away from sight. It was one of those things that makes the hair stand up on the back of your neck. The Flying Dutchman was the consensus of the bridge watch. Wild things can happen below deck. The engineering spaces are full of their own stories. I was a mechanic on the USS Enterprise for several years. We conducted periodic maintenance on heat exchangers, which meant we opened them up to pull out gunk, hydrolance the tubes, and replace zinc oxide discs. When we did this on the main condenser, we'd find sea life in various conditions: chopped up fish, crabs, shrimp, and pieces of unidentified animals. One time, we pulled out several larger chunks that we assembled on a workbench. It was a 4-foot poor beagle shark. It truly smelled awful, and our chiefs made us throw it overboard. We had a few games to keep ourselves entertained. We had a running war against the other mechanics with slingshots, threw oily rags, ambushed them from the bilge, held bilge regattas for handcrafted boats, etc. The most risky game was called Danger Nut. You'd take a nut, fastener, slide it down to the base of a screwdriver, then spin it using low pressure air. Once it was spinning, you'd wing the LP air valve open and the nut would fly off the end of the screwdriver, bouncing off metal engine room equipment. Nobody usually got hit, but a little danger did wake you up on the 0200-0700 watch. On rare occasion, we'd stop in the open ocean for a swim call, an event that was more trouble than it was worth. We'd line up in the hangar bay, jump off one of the aircraft elevators, and were supposed to swim to the fantail to climb back on board. The problem was that a lot of sailors in the US Navy can't swim. People would start floating off away from the ship and had to be collected by a small boat. We were hundreds of miles from shore. Like others have mentioned, the ocean is pitch black at night. If anyone fell overboard, you'd better hope the few watchstanders were awake and paying attention, or nobody would ever know. But that made nighttime the right time to dispose of items we couldn't otherwise. Someone pushed the aircrew's goddamn hot dog cart overboard and the XO lost his damn mind. I still laugh about that crap. Anyway, we delivered the bomb. My mind is broken by the concept of people in the Navy who can't swim. I was a Coast Guardsman and worked on a cutter based in Southern California right out of basic training. We were headed north and happened to be alongside an enormous migration of dolphins. I mean, they went as far as the horizon. It's not something I could ever explain to someone. Even showing them a video couldn't express the sense of scale. My favorite sight was in the summertime off the northern coast of Iceland. The sun was up for my whole midnight for watch that required I sit on the bow with a pair of binos looking for obstructions. There was a slight chill, so I brought up a thermos of hot tea. However, the wind was completely absent. The sea was glass flat all morning as I stared mostly at the beautiful cliffs on the mainland. Early on, some ripples started appearing, then black figures. I realized they were mother minke whales with calves. I must have seen 100 that morning, something I'll never forget. As far as freaky goes, a group of 6 of us were on the bridge of a ship in the middle of the Atlantic. Closest land was hundreds of miles away. All of us saw a green flash go up, then back down onto the water, probably 2-3 miles off the port side. We never were able to figure out what it was. Hey, thanks for making it all the way to the end, you absolute Chad. You're a legend. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to like and subscribe for more of Reddit's top content. I'll see you in the next video, you beautiful people.